Hi, my name is Eunice Gonzalez, and I am representing Group 4. Our topic is genetically modified crops. The group participants is Omar, Haziel, and Patrick. I want to thank them very much for helping out with this presentation and helping putting it all together. Our topic, genetically modified crops. I would like to talk about the history of genetically modified crops. What is genetic engineering? What are some genetically modified crops today? What is the current regulation that governs GMOs? And what will be the future of genetically modified crops? Let's start with the history. In 1866, Gregor Mendel identifies the basic process of genetics. In 1953, chemist Rosalind Franklin, scientist James Watson, and Francis Crick identify the structure of DNA. In 1973, biochemist Herbert Boyer and Stanley Cohen developed genetic engineering by inserting DNA from one bacteria into another. In 1986, the federal government establishes the framework for the regulation of biotechnology. In 1990, the first wave of GMO produce was genetically engineered and became available to consumers. In 2016, Congress passes a law requiring labeling of GMOs. Gregor Mendel, through his work on pea plants, discovered the laws of inheritance. He figured out that genes come in pairs and are inherited, one from each parent. He then tracked the separation of parental genes and their appearance in the offspring as dominant or recessive traits. Ancient crop modification. Selective breeding and artificial selection are a process by which humans use plant breeding to selectively develop particular phenotype traits by choosing which plants will breed with one another. Farmers have used this method for thousands of years to create and improve crops. According to National Geographic, broccoli, cauliflower, and cabbage were all derived from the wild mustard plant through selective breeding. As shown in this slide, the wild mustard contributed to naturally breeding and selective breeding of these 5 crops. The wild mustard was combined with the cauliflower to give us a bigger crown. The wild mustard was also bred with broccoli to give us broccoli spears, larger broccoli spears. The wild mustard and the cabbage were naturally bred to give us a bigger cabbage head. The same with the kale. It was also selectively bred with the wild mustard to give us the kale leaves, or the large leafy kale leaves. Robert Boyer and Stanley Cohen in 1973 developed a method of removing plasmids from the cell and then reinserting them in other cells. This was to become the future that led to bioengineering and genetically modifying crops. These 2 men jump-started the field of genetic engineering. They developed the first artificial genetic modification through transgenesis. They were able to transfer of genes from one organism to another. Genetic engineering allows for scientists to change or modify the characteristics of a plant, animal, or microorganism by transferring DNA from one organism to another. In doing so, it allows for crops to grow with advantageous characteristics such as pesticide resistance, faster growth, and disease and drought resistance, and an overall better survival rate amongst crops. Shown here are some crops that were released to consumers in 1990 that were genetically modified. As seen here, you could see the summer squash, the soybean, corn, tomatoes, and potatoes. Other products not shown in this slide is cotton, papaya, and canola, all GMO products. In this slide, you see before and after pictures. You see BT crops and traditional grown crops shown side by side. As you can see on the left, the hardy, tantalizing yellow, healthy BT corn. And in the middle and in the far right, you can see the less appealing crop that has been infested with the European corn borer and the southwestern corn borer. BT corn is the biggest genetically modified crop within the United States. It contains genes from the bacteria Bacillus thuringiensis. Corn plants were genetically engineered with genes from this bacteria that code for several proteins that contain pesticides that are toxic to insects. This allows for the corn crops to extend its protection over the course of a growing season. According to FDA, BT corn annually saves farmers about $23 million from decreased insecticide use and has consistently increased yields over 5 to 10%. On this slide is a graph. On the y-axis, you can see the percentages of represented in kilograms over hectares. And in blue, you could see the chemical insecticides used in traditional farming. The blue in 1996 was very high, 0.2% of chemical insecticides used in traditional farming. You could see the blue line has decreased drastically in 2010. The green line represents the BT crops. They have grown from 1996 to 2014. There have been a higher growth spurt. Since the 1990s, genetically modified crops have become increasingly popular, as shown by this graph. According to Cornell Alliance for Science in 2010, 80% of corn, soybeans, cotton, and sugar beets in the United States were genetically modified variation. Since its initial implementation, the use of genetically modified crops has skyrocketed within the agricultural industry, while the use of insecticides has decreased dramatically, as shown in this slide. Biofortification is used to increase the nutritional value in crops. This is another GMO crop. Golden rice was developed in order to fight the lack of beta-carotene in white rice. Golden rice, one of, if not the most famous genetically modified crop. This rice has been engineered with beta-carotene, which converts to vitamin A in the body. Vitamin A deficiency can lead to blindness and impaired immune system. According to the World Health Organization, vitamin A deficiency is a public health problem in more than half of all countries, especially in Africa and Southeast Asia, hitting the hardest in young children and pregnant women in low-income countries. Biofortification product, also the Starlink controversy. Starlink was a strain of BT corn approved by the EPA for growth in 1998, but only for animal consumption. It was later found in the environment, and it was then banned from human consumption and was only used in animal feed. According to the University of California, Davis, controversy began when traces of DNA from Starlink corn were found in taco shells and other corn-related products. This led to a massive recall on food products that contained corn. Here's another graph that shows the comparison of herbicide-tolerant variations symbolized by HT and the insect-resistant variations symbolized in BT. As you can see, from 1996 to 2018, the growth of these crops that are genetically modified with herbicide-tolerant variations and insect-resistant variations is grown very popular. Many ecologists have considered genetically modified crops to be a biosecurity issue. Since its implementation, genetically modified crops have shown to be an invasive species amongst its natural counterpart. Ecologists have come to the conclusion that genetically modified crops cannot peacefully coexist with non-genetically modified crops. Currently, the FDA has considered Bt corn and other genetically modified crops to be safe for consumption and nutritionally equivalent to traditional corn. Labeling. Congress passed in 2016 a law that requires foods from derived animals will not need to have disclosure. In other words, animals fed GMO products do not need to be disclosed to consumers. But products that have been genetically modified must be disclosed. In addition, those products that contain broth, stock, or water, or a similar ingredient, and our second most predominant ingredient would independently be subject to labeling requirements, which means that if the main ingredient held in these products is genetically modified, it must be disclosed to the public. In conclusion, agriculture, including livestock and forestry, accounts for 24% of human-generated greenhouse gas emissions. With our ever-changing world creating food that is more efficient, the best way may be to help us continue our existence through these GMO products. We never know what life could throw at us, and being picky with our food could help further doom us all. The future requires all of us to be informed about GMOs because GMOs are here and they're here to stay. Thank you very much for listening. Appreciate your time. Have a good day.